Welcome to JOCKO Clips. If you like the video, like, comment, share, subscribe, and check out the description for JOCKO's products. I've personally used JOCKO's products before, and I absolutely love them all. It's changed my life listening to this man, so I hope you guys enjoy.
I was a young boy living in a foster home and was sexually assaulted by my foster father and sometimes other people over a course of a couple years. I was eventually adopted, and what had happened to me was never discussed, and I never got help for it. I was afraid of everything, and eventually I played sports in high school and felt less afraid. Went into the army and felt completely unafraid of anything. When I got out, I got into a long-term relationship. I told my then girlfriend what had happened to me. She was the first person I ever told about this. She convinced me to reach out to my foster parents, and I did, and it was a total disaster. They kept my room where all this bad stuff had happened exactly the same as it was 20 years ago, or 20 years prior when these horrors had occurred. I had my moment to confront this monster that had done this to me, and I failed. I used a word that he always said to me, when he was assaulting me. He just said, "Sometimes people change." All of a sudden, I was a weak young boy again, and I couldn't fight back. I left the house and had serious self-doubt. Eventually, I became a cop and then a detective, and have faced all types of bad people, from junkies to murderers. I even get full confessions out of child rapists. I'm sick to my stomach afterwards. It's terrible to hear what these animals do. My question is this. Recently, the past has come back with a vengeance. I can't get through a short time, maybe an hour or two, without thinking about the past and my failure. The only time I have peace is when I absolutely destroy myself working out. I consider it punishing myself and feel better when I do it. How can I stop this, or at least manage it better?
So, this is, obviously a horrible situation, and, horrible that you had to live through this and that any kid or any human would have to go through this. As far as how you can manage this better, I'm going to go a little bit here. So, one of the blocks of training that we go through in a SEAL platoon is called close quarters combat. And this is the training. You're in a thing called the kill house. It's ballistic walls. There's targets in there. You're moving around dynamically. You're shooting live fire ammunition. There's people 6 inches away from you. You're taking really close shots. There's a lot of pressure in there. There's a lot of details, a lot of standard operating procedures and safety procedures that you have to follow. There's a lot of process. It's like, do you need to go left or right? Is that a good guy or a bad guy? Because you have to identify the targets. Should you move or should you stay? How do you communicate that you need to move? Should you shoot or should you not shoot at a target? And so there's all these things going on when you enter a room. All these things that you have to go through. All these steps that you have to take. All these procedures that you have to follow. All these decisions that you have to make. And it all happens in a split second. And so in a kill house, the training cadre is actually above you. It's not a normal house. The rooms have what we call catwalks above them. So the cadre can be up above you in the catwalks, and they're walking around and they're watching you very closely. It's like watching a football game on TV. You're seeing it from like the perfect view above the person, and they're in the room with you, but they're not in your way at all because they're up on the catwalk. So what happens is when a room entry happens, you catch a lot of critique from the people in the catwalk. And they'll say, you could have done this, or you could have done that, or you could have moved left, or you should have pushed forward, or it would have been better if you'd done this other thing. So there's all these different things. And when my cadre was running it, that's what we do. That's what happened to me when I was cadre. That's what I would do. That's what everyone does. And at some point, I kind of realized that all that stuff is good, and I get it. Like, you got to get people to run the procedures correctly. But at a certain point, what I would tell guy, like after a guy was kind of beat down, like he just couldn't get something right, or he would, a bunch of people would jump on him about a decision that he made or a movement that he made or whatever. And I'm not talking about a safety thing, because a safety thing is different. I'm talking about a tactical decision. And when you walk into a room, there's a bunch of tactical decisions you can make. And if there's 5 different decisions that you could make when you walk into a room, there's something that there's one way of doing it that would be like really clean. One would be a little bit less. One might be just as clean as the first one, but it's a different attitude. There's just all these different decisions that you could make. It's like just a multitude of ways that you could react, because that's what this question is, how you reacted in this situation. And eventually, as I would see this with an individual, I would eventually, what I would tell guys is, listen, you did what you did. You did what you did. That's what you did. That's the decision that you made at the time. And you know what? There's different ways you could have done it. You don't like the way you did it. I don't like the way you did it. One of the other cadre members doesn't like the way you did it. It doesn't, what I'm saying, it doesn't really matter. Here, first of all, you can't take it back. You can't go back and undo it. And by the way, you don't get to rehearse these things to a point where you get to do this perfectly, because you won't be able to do that. If you rehearsed a move in a room that you had seen before and you rehearsed it 10 times, that's a totally different game, right? If I already know what the room consists of and I'm going to rehearse and choreograph the entire movement, that's a different game. That's not decision making. That's just rote memorization. We're not talking about that. We're talking about how did you react, and what you did is what you did, and you did it for a reason. What you saw in front of you, you made this decision for a reason. Maybe you saw a threat when there wasn't one there, or you lost situational awareness, or you rushed. You went too fast. You tried to rush, and all those things can kind of trip you up. But that's what you did, and you did what you did, and you can't take it back. So instead of everyone sitting there saying you should have done this and you should have done that, let's do this. Let's see what we can learn from it. Let's see why you did what you did. Let's see why you made that decision. Because once we know why you did something, now we have something that we can work with. We have something that we can improve upon. That is what I think you need to do in this situation. And really, when anyone makes a mistake or has a reaction that they don't like, you can't worry. You can't continue to worry about something that has already transpired. What you have to do is you have to look at it and say, what can I learn from it? What can I take from this? And how can I take this mistake and make me better? So you could look at this. Why did you do that? Right? Maybe you did it because you didn't want to open up these old wounds. Maybe you did it because you confronting this individual would have caused more drama, and that drama you at that moment you assessed and said, you know what? This drama isn't worth it. Maybe you protected yourself from more drama, and that was your instinct. And maybe if you would have started confronting this guy and going crazy, who knows what could have happened. And maybe it could have taken a turn for the worse. We don't know what the outcome was. We know that you weren't happy with your decision. Understandable. But we don't even know what the other decisions would have led to. So where you're actually getting bogged down and distraught about something that you don't even know if it was a good decision or a bad decision. It feels like it was a bad decision, but you don't know what the outcomes of the other decisions even were. So you can't change the outcome of what happened in the past. You can't do it. But what you can do is you can grow from it. That's what you can do. You can learn from it. You can actually take that scenario and you can mentally replay it in your head, and you can figure out if possibly there would have been or could have been a better outcome. Or maybe that outcome that you had wasn't that bad, or maybe it leads somewhere else. We don't know yet. But that's where you are at right now. You can't change the outcome of something that has occurred in the past. Now, I'm gonna throw a little dichotomy at you right now. And I'm gonna say something that's might be a little bit hard to understand, and I'm gonna try and talk my way through it. Because while you can't change the past, what you can change is you can absolutely change the way that the past is perceived. So let me give you a detached example, just another example. If you had an individual, someone gets fired from a job. They get fired from their job, and when they get fired from the job, what it does is their confidence goes down, and they get depressed, and they decide they're not going to even apply for a new job because I don't even know if I deserve to get a new job, and they sit around, and eventually they go out and apply for kind of like a lesser job. And, who knows, maybe they start drinking to relieve some of their depression, and now they're late, and now they end up on a downward spiral. We would look at them being fired as something that destroyed them and ruined their life. That's how we would perceive it. Hey, the individual they were doing fine, then they got fired, and now they lost their confidence, they got depressed, they started drinking, they didn't apply for good jobs, and now their life is totally different and it's a bad place. We would perceive that them getting fired did that to them. But if a person got fired from their job and instead it was like a wake-up call for them, and they immediately applied for a bunch of other jobs, and maybe they didn't get those because they had just been fired, but maybe they took a lesser job, a lower paying job, but they got in there and they had realized they had made a mistake, and they started getting after that like they'd never gotten after it before. They started working as hard as they possibly could and got promoted, and then got promoted again and just dominated in those positions and went even harder and dominated even more and eventually took over the whole company. And this isn't crazy. This isn't too far-fetched. This can happen. But if that happened, that same incident, the firing of this individual, would be perceived in a totally different way. It would be perceived as a catalyst that changed their life for the better. And there are all kinds of examples like that in the world. The past can't be changed, but the past can change you for the better, or it can change you for the worse. And my question is, why not make it for the better? Why not make the past change you for the better? You hear the term narrative thrown around these days, especially like in political circles. You'll hear it on the news that narratives, they're created in the political arena. And what the narrative does is it supports an overarching aim or an overarching value or an overarching goal. That's the way people use the term narrative right now. But I'm not talking about that type of political narrative. What I'm saying here is that you actually write the narrative of what happened in your past. I'm not talking about a fabrication of it. I'm talking you get to write the narrative of where it takes you. You get to write the narrative. You get to write the reality of where you end up. You get to write it. You get to control it. So what I'm saying is, control it. Get control of that narrative. Take control of that narrative. That horrible story in your past ends the way that you want it to end. You control the narrative. You control that story, so make that story good. Make that story epic. Make that story and make the direction that your life goes, make it heroic. And that's how I think you can get control or maybe handle better some of that horrific stuff that you've been through. And I think that's all I've got for tonight. So, Echo Charles, speaking of being heroic,
Yes.
speaking of controlling our own narrative of the past, of the present, of the future, what can we do to write that heroic story for ourselves?
Yes. Well, let's start with the path. We're going to stay on the path. We're going to get on the path. We're going to be on the path. So part of the path is jiu-jitsu, of course, like we've said many times. You're going to need a gi. What gi to get?
I got interviewed the other day.
Cool.
And the guy kind of sets up this kind of big question.
Sure.
He says, you know, in this day and age, and I'm not going to do him justice. It was a great question. It was a nice question. I get it.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to do it as eloquently as he did it. But the question was about, you know, in this day and age, when men, and it was one of those like men like type things. In this day and age, when men are, you know, can be isolated and can get depressed and don't have meaning and all this stuff, right?
Sure.
What do you recommend to men that feel that way, that feel isolated and feel alone and feel depressed and feel like they don't have meaning in their life and feel like they can't connect with anyone? And I was like, oh, cool, yeah, go to jiu-jitsu classes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I felt bad,
Right.
because they wanted me to give like the big, profound thing about where to find meaning in your life.
Yeah.
And what I said was, yeah, start training jiu-jitsu. Because the thing that he grabbed me with is like, oh, you know, you want to have a goal, you want to have meaning, you want to connect with people, you don't want to be alone, loneliness and all this stuff. I'm like, yeah, go train jiu-jitsu. All those problems get solved right there.
Yeah, they do.
Right? All of a sudden you got people to hang out with, you got a mission, you got fitness going on, you got meaning. It's all kinds of good stuff going on.
Yeah.
So go train some jiu-jitsu is what I'm saying.
Yeah. And
Good
that's
place to start.